The parable of the shrewd manager. Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of the management, because you cannot be manager any longer." The manager said to himself, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I am not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I will do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses." So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first one, "How much do you owe my master?" 3,000 liters of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 1,500. Then he asked the second, "And now, how much do you owe?" 13 tons of wheat, he replied. He told him, "Take your bill and make it 24. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than our people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it's gone, you will be welcome into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." The Pharisees, who loved money, heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight." This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Nicoletta, very much indeed. Written in Greek, translated into English, and then read for us with a Greek accent, which was delightful. Now, if you were listening to that, you've got to be thinking it. Is that not just the strangest story Jesus ever told? I mean, did you hear what happened? Jesus tells great stories. Some of the stories Jesus tells, they're heartwarming. So, previous chapter we've got lost sheep, lost coin, lost son. You're getting this sense of the love and the forgiveness of God. Great stories. Some stories that Jesus tells, well, they spur us on. So you've got the parable of the persistent widow. Do you know that one? Where she just won't give up until she gets justice. And it stirs you to keep praying, not to give up until God's answered. Or there are the stories that Jesus tells that seek to change our priorities. That's where we were this morning. We had the story of a man who built bigger barns. He thought, I'm going to kick back and enjoy life. Instead, he kicked the bucket and he died. Lots of stories with different purposes. But these verses that Nicoletta's just read for us, you're not left a little puzzled by them. Because it all just sounds a bit corrupt. The villain in the story seems to be proclaimed as the hero. So what on earth is going on here? Is this Jesus having an anti-capitalist moment? Is he just going on a rant? Or is there more to this? Here's what I want us to do. I want us to imagine this story is being made into a film. And now I reckon if you're making this story into a film, there are 3 short scenes to the story. And we're just going to look at each of those 3 scenes, and we're going to try and understand what on earth Jesus is teaching us through this twisted tale. But we need to realize who's directing the film. Don't miss this. Our passage begins with these 4 words. Jesus told his disciples. Do you see that? Jesus told his disciples. This is Jesus training his disciples. This story is for them, and it addresses the question, what does it look like to follow Jesus? He's teaching them about the nature of discipleship. So that was relevant for them. I'm guessing that's relevant for us. Whether we'd call ourselves a committed follower of Jesus or not. You might just be here thinking through the Christian faith, well, this is relevant. This is what Jesus says it looks like to follow him. We've got to understand this. What does discipleship look like? So cue the action, scene one, and I'm calling this, scene one, the end is coming. The end is coming. Verse 1, Jesus told his disciples there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called them in and asked him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer." Now that is a bad day in the office for this manager. It took me back to 2002. I had been graduated about 18 months working as an engineer in Cambridge. I was loving my job. Okay, things were going well. But one day we arrived in the office, logged onto emails as you do, and there was an email from the chief exec. And the chief exec was summoning us all to a meeting in the canteen that morning. Now when that happens, conspiracy theories start to spread around the company, and everyone's wondering, well, is he leaving? Have we been bought out? Maybe we've gone bankrupt. And so there's this sort of eager anticipation of a hush as we gather, and in walks the chief exec. He was an emotional kind of chap, but it was very obvious from looking at him, his bloodshot eyes, that he had been crying. And as he starts to speak, he says, "We've got difficult times ahead. We're going to have to let quite a few of you go. We're running out of capital, and we've got to keep this ship afloat." And the tears flowed as he spoke. Now, it's funny what happens in that moment. Funny's not the word. You start to sort of play through the mortgage, the student loans. You're asking yourself, will it be last in, first out? I'd only been there 18 months. Or you're looking around the room and you're trying to work out who's likely to go before you are. And then the rest of the day was spent with line managers rather miserably calling people into their office and sitting down with them. And then the individuals come out of their office, sometimes in tears. They'd go and clear their desk and they'd leave the company. And they were gone. Now that moment is a moment of security being stripped away. You might have experienced it. It's going from life is fine because I've got a job that pays the mortgage, I can cover the bills, to suddenly you're completely unsure what tomorrow holds. Now that is where Jesus is taking us at the start of this story in scene 1. You've got a rich man and you've got this manager. And the manager is in charge of all the rich man's finances. I presume it's a plum job. The manager's doing well for himself. But then it happens. The boss summons him in. And he says, I've heard reports. I can't trust you anymore. Tie up any loose ends. Clear your desk. We're done. Can you imagine the panic? The security has just been swiped away from his feet. And fear sets in. There's no job seekers allowance back there, no welfare state. And life brings us moments like this. It's not always jobs. Sudden change when everything was just going fine. Comfort and security to fear, panic, uncertainty. What's the future holding? And in those moments, you reevaluate everything. So the manager's response, verse 3, the manager said to himself, "What shall I do now? My master's taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg." Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, actually, John, I'm okay. I'm not going to lose my job. I'm retired, or I'm a student, or I don't work, whatever it might be. But actually, we've got to get this. Jesus is pointing to a bigger change here. Okay, he's not talking about unemployment. We're going to see this more clearly as the story progresses, but this story is being told in the context of life and death. He's not saying to you, you might lose your job. He's saying to you, you will lose your life. One day, and it could be sudden. And our story is asking, how are we going to approach that day? That's the question here. A few years back, I was reading this book called Chasing Daylight. Has anyone read this? Chasing Daylight, Eugene O'Kelly. He was chief exec of KPMG for many years. No one's read it. It's a really good book. Autobiographical account. And he's telling this bit of his life where everything was going fine. Hugely important job, massively wealthy, no fears in the world. But 24th of May 2005, he stepped into his doctor's office and he was told that his brain was riddled with cancer and his death was imminent. Have a listen to how Eugene describes this moment. He says, "Wow, is there any way really to prepare for the suddenness? To have that tucked away fear that lives constantly in all of us, that a calamity can happen, technically at any moment, be transformed within days or moments into reality. To have that fear that you can bury at least sometimes, even most of the time, explode into a new state of being that you can't deny for even a second. It was beyond jarring. No time frame was given yet, but it appeared as if I'd been catapulted into the last phase of my life." Now, the book, as you might imagine, it's a sobering read as you follow Eugene's journey through his illness. But the thing that comes through again and again and again is powerlessness. You see, Eugene had been a powerful man. He had controlled every aspect of his life, but he couldn't control his death. He tried, but he couldn't. The manager in Jesus' story has got the same experience of powerlessness. Verse 3, "What shall I do now? My master's taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg." You hear the powerlessness? And that is where the lights on scene 1 fade. The end is coming. But the story moves on, and we come to scene 2. Here's where the twist in the tale begins. And I'm calling this scene 2 a change in priorities. A change in priorities. Follow with me, verse 4. The manager says, "I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses." So he called in each one of his manager's debtors. He asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" 3,000 litres of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 1,500. And then he asked the second, "And how much do you owe?" 30 tons of wheat, he replied. He told him, "Take your bill, and make it 24. Now these are big sums of debt that are being written down here. 6 tons of wheat. That is a lot of wheat. That's a lot of loaves of bread. Debt removed. 1,500 litres of oil. Quick Google, I reckon that's about $7,000 in today's market value. This isn't simply a sort of bottle of wine being given out to loyal customers. Thank you for doing business. This is massive favors he's giving out. And why? Verse 4, "So that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses." Now, it's a bit of a puzzle. We need to notice what's happened. The manager has seen the reality that the end is coming. His security's been removed, and so his priorities have changed. He's no longer living for the here and now, enjoying the trappings that this plum job afforded him. He's living with the end in sight. And it's completely different. His actions are completely different. He's all about the future. He's completely focused on what comes next, a total change in priority. Now listen to Eugene O'Kelly again. This was his reflection. He says, "I'd always preached commitment to goals, setting them, pursuing them, completing them. Now that we've completed our fact-finding with the doctors, I resolved to do 3 things. Leave my job, choose a medical protocol for treatment, and make sure it's a treatment which allowed me to make the time remaining the best of my life. and as good as it could possibly be for those affected by my situation. And he goes on to say these words. He says, immediately my energy and focus changed from the priorities I had to new priorities I would set for the months remaining to me. Total change in priorities. In fact, intriguingly, read the account, and Eugene starts going to church. He starts searching for deeper meaning in life. He said he'd never not believed in God. He just hadn't really done anything about it. His priorities weren't wired that way. But this sudden change led to new priorities, and it led to him finding Jesus. It's lovely when you read it. Now that is what's going on with our manager in the story. The end is coming, and his priorities have changed. And I'm guessing we can get hold of this on one level. You can sort of understand that moment where suddenly everything changes and your priorities are completely different. But you're still not left wondering, well, that's fine. I get that bit, but this is all just a bit corrupt, isn't it? He's getting the sack, and so his parting gift to his boss is to give away loads of his boss's money. What's Jesus doing telling this story? Well, he's investing in his future using someone else's money. And on the one hand, that doesn't feel very comfortable. And yet, actually, I think that's the brilliantly clever part of the story. Presumably, the manager is actually fairly wealthy in his own right. He's been doing this job for quite a while, seemingly. Probably well paid, well looked after. Jesus could have told the story with the manager using his own wealth to throw a party for his friends, to invest in his own future that way. You see, using his own money to invest in his future. But actually, the manager's own wealth doesn't get a mention in the story. It's all his master's wealth. And I think that's very deliberate. I find it really helpful. Jesus calls him a manager. He calls him a steward. Because the point is, everything he had belonged to someone else. As far as the story is concerned, nothing came from him. Nothing ultimately belonged to him. So now do you start to see what Jesus is doing in this story? He's encouraging us to see our lives in the same light. He's saying, actually, everything we have ultimately belongs to someone else, which is not our default. Certainly not my default. We like to think, I've earned it, so it's mine to do what I like with, my money, my house, my car, my pension fund. That's our default, but we need to be clear, that does not hold together as a worldview. Let me tell you about Dina. Dina, she works 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, scavenging on a rubbish heap in Cambodia. She's searching for plastic, metal, glass, whatever she can find. Huge health and safety risks. And what does Dina get for it? What's her take home at the end of the day? 15 pence. 15 pence for 14 hours work. It's barely a penny an hour. So do you see the problem with saying, I've earned it, I deserve it? Can you see it just doesn't work? Didn't Dina earn it? Doesn't she deserve it more than you and I deserve it? No, Jesus gives us a different way of seeing the world. It's not my money. They're not my possessions. We're managers. We're stewards. It all belongs to my master. It belongs to God who made me, who owns me. He gives us what is his to look after it for him. In fact, verse 12 really spells it out for us. Verse 12, if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? Now, I don't think the focus of this story is on the corruption. Jesus is giving us a picture of the reality of life. This happens every day. So you go down the pub with friends, you buy them drinks. You're using your master's money. It's God's money. You buy someone a birthday gift. It was God who funded that gift. I know it'd be a little odd to sign the card, love from God. We don't do that, but we need to have this mindset. It all comes from him. It's how we're meant to view ourselves. We're stewards. Everything we have belongs to someone else. So scene one, The end is coming. Scene 2, the priorities change. And it says Jesus finishes the story that he gets to his punchline. This is scene 3, where we're being told, use your master's wealth shrewdly. Verse 8. Follow with me. That the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, here it is. He says, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. Whoever's dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with very much. So if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Now notice, Jesus doesn't actually commend the dishonest manager for his dishonesty. He's not encouraging corruption here. In fact, he critiques corruption. He's encouraging honesty. But we're meant to see the punchline here. Have a look down at verse 9 again. If you're not completely convinced this is about life and death, verse 9 helps us. Jesus says, to you and to me, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it's gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Do you hear that? This is about being welcomed into eternal dwellings. This isn't about buying rounds of drinks at the pub. This is about our focus. This is about how you and I view the world in which we live now. How do you see your life? What is your priority? Are you left thinking, well, how can I pay off my mortgage? How can I save enough for my retirement? How on earth am I ever going to be able to afford to buy a house in Cockfosters? Impossible dreams. See, those concerns, they're all here and now concerns. They're all concerns for people whose focus is fixed on this life. But Jesus is saying it's the wrong focus. Eternal dwellings. That's what matters. He's talking about heaven. And he's saying, he's not trying to tell us that we can buy our way into heaven. Okay, the Bible's very clear about that. You can't buy your way into heaven. No, he's saying we should use what God has given us now to prepare ourselves and others for eternity. Because this life is not the ultimate reality. That's what we need to get. That's what we get wrong. This life is just a fleeting breath. When you and I stand in eternity, the concerns of today will completely fade away. Because this is not the ultimate reality. But we get it wrong, and we particularly get it wrong with our use of money. We live as though this is the final reality. It's a bit like, imagine you're playing a game of Monopoly, and you roll the dice, and you move your bit along, and you land on Mayfair. And Mayfair's got a hotel on it, and it's not your hotel. So you've got to shell out £2,000 for Mayfair with a hotel. And so you start counting your money, and you've got sort of 600. And then you go through that miserable bit of trying to sell your houses and mortgage all your properties. You get another 900 together. 1,500, you're 500 short. But you're determined. So what do? You get out your cash card and you run down the road to the bank machine by Co-op and you withdraw 500 quid and you come back and you hand it all over. Now that would be complete madness, wouldn't it? Because you're mixing the game with reality. You're missing what is the ultimate. Well, Jesus is saying you and I make this same mistake. It's not that life in the here and now is just a game. It's far more than that, but it's not the ultimate reality. And yet, time and time again, we are investing in this life rather than in the reality of eternity. Jesus says, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves so that when it's gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. In fact, he pushes harder in verse 12. He says, if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Now that is uncomfortable. The either or there is deeply uncomfortable. I can't love God and money. I can't be living for the pleasures of the here and now and living with my eyes set on the eternity to come. You can't really be doing both. And Jesus is saying to us, so which is it? Which are you living for? Verse 14, the Pharisees, who loved money, heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, you are the ones who justify yourself in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value is highly detestable in God's sight. We need to hear the challenge. And today we're very deliberately talking about money. If you're here this morning, you've had money and money and money. We want to do this because Jesus does this. Again and again, Jesus talks to us about money because this is one of Satan's most effective ways of stopping us living for Jesus. You see, Satan will constantly be whispering to you, you earned it, you deserved it, it's yours. What are you going to do with it? But tonight, our loving Creator is saying to us, no, it's all mine. Don't let the blessings I give you become a curse. Fix your eyes on eternity. Live for the ultimate reality. And use my money, the money that I have given to you, to help others see this reality. It's one of the big mistakes we make with Christian giving. We sort of assume that churches talk about money because God needs people to give him their money. But that could not be more back to front if it tried. God is telling each one of us, no, give regularly and cheerfully to your local church because doing that is good for you. Doing that helps remind us it's his money, not our money. Doing that helps us live for eternity. And doing that helps share this amazing news with others. But we find it hard, which is why Jesus tells this story. So we need to pray to him. Now, what we're going to do now, we're going to listen to a song. There'll be words up on screen so you can follow the words. We're just going to take time to pray, to respond to God in the quiet of our own hearts, to the challenge he's given to us.